I met Jimi, I think it was 1996, and I was, the winery that I was working for, we had arranged to buy some barrels from Kenzie, where Jimi was working, and that winery that I worked for was either underfunded or didn't want to fund certain things that I felt were important, and one of those things that was important was the brake system on our flatbed. And I was the one that had to pick up the barrels, and I really didn't want to drive that truck because I didn't think it was safe. And I spent half a day trying to bleed the brake system and make them work well enough to haul a load of barrels, and then set off up to Kenzie to pick the barrels up. And I got there, and Jimi was there, so that was the day that I actually first met Jimi. So I had my list with X number of barrels to pick up with the barrel numbers so we could pick them out and we knew which ones that we're getting. And then Jimi told me that, well, no, we don't have that many barrels. And I said, well, here's the list. We have barrel numbers and everything. And I noticed that some of the barrels that were set aside were the barrels that I had barrel numbers for. So obviously those barrels had then been promised or sold to someone else. And so I was a little bit annoyed because the number of barrels that they ended up selling to the winery that I was working for, I could have put in the back of a pickup truck and not have driven a flatbed that I felt threatened my life and anyone else who was on the road if the brakes failed. And so we got in a little bit of an argument. And Jimi said, look, whatever, that classic thing. It's like, here's my packing list, there's the barrel numbers, they're right there, so I'd like to load them. And Jimi's a little bit bigger than me, and argued a little bit, but realized that what's the point? They're not going to sell us the barrels, and there's no point in arguing, especially with this guy who looks big and maybe he could be mean. But he wasn't mean. And so that was my first meeting with Jimi, and I didn't run into him again, I think, at least for several months. And I got invited to a party at his house, but I hadn't put two and two together. So I didn't realize that, but another winemaker friend said, hey, there's a party here in McMinnville, you should come and hang out. And so that's the second time I met Jimi, and we didn't have any arguments, which was great, and we ended up talking until late in the night and talking about philosophy and things like that. And I think after that night, then we were pretty good friends. No threat of hostile arguments. Jimi was full of a lot of contradiction, I guess. Somebody who was, extremely interesting from an intellectual perspective. Loved to eat, cook, laugh, all these things, which I think is what made Jimi so special to a lot of people. And Janie at one point had asked us to come up with descriptions for Jimi, and we were kind of throwing out things like sensitive bully brute. Those are all, it's all kind of a joke, but that's, he had many different facets, and I think that's what made him such a great person, part of what made him such a great person.
What was he passionate about?
I think he was passionate about life in general, but certainly, when it comes to our profession, he was passionate about all aspects of making wine, what happened in the vineyard and how that applied to environmental things and methods of farming and methods of making wine. But in the end, I think, it was about the end result and what do things taste like and when did they taste best. And I think, I think in a lot of ways, some of our common ground was things taste best when you're enjoying them with your friends and your family. And so, Jimi was a great person to sit down at the table with. Being one of the early people involved in biodynamics and You know, I don't know if Demeter was certifying at that point. They must have been, but that was, you know, around that time. So it was mid-late 90s, and you know, I think that, you know, it was one thing that Jimi definitely talked about a lot was biodynamics, and he had a postage-sized stamped garden in his backyard that was really shaded, and it was amazing because things grew incredibly well there. You know, I think manure had something to do with that, but you know, probably biodynamics is, I think, the, you know, one thing that Jimi is probably more known for than anything else. Well, I stopped by his house. So I was working on my winery space in McMinnville, and it was a Saturday morning, and I was going to stop by Jimi's house to have coffee with him. And there were ambulances and police cars on his street, and I thought they were at his neighbor's house. And Dawn's car was parked out front. I thought, oh, Dawn's there having coffee with Jimi. And you know, I walked up the steps to his back door, and then, you know, it was pretty obvious that those people were in his house, and Jimi was laying on the floor, and he was dead, and it was shocking. So Pascal would have something that was a link to his father, but also just for that particular vintage, the idea was that I don't think Jimi would have wanted to leave any of his growers hanging with that fruit. So the idea was, like, let's take the fruit, split it up, make the wine, get the wine through bottling, sell it, help sell it, which we didn't realize that his sister didn't need any help in that department. And we actually all should have taken lessons from her, which we know now, or at least I know now. So I think that was the basic idea, you know, to keep alive a link that was, you know, direct to Jimi, that Pascal could look at and be a part of it if he wanted to be a part of it, and do the honorable thing for the people who Jimi did business with. I don't know, I think that's kind of Jimi's thing. Like, he brought a lot of people together, and you know, he's a magnet for people, and he was glue that held everything together. And you know, I think that was kind of his gift to all of us, including Janie. You know, she had this new set of friends that she didn't know she had, and we got a friend too.
You talked a bit earlier about the size of Brooks and its success. Talk a bit about the impact that it's had under Janie's leadership.
Well, I guess the impact is international. You know, I think it started, you know, pretty quickly under Janie's leadership, that she had impact here in the Willamette Valley, and you know, it spread to national, and it's beyond that now. She's just she's amazing, and she has an amazing amount of energy and skill.
Do you have a favorite memory of Jimi?
Probably, I wouldn't be able to single it down to any one moment, but I think it's probably just Jimi sitting at a table, smiling.
What about a memory of Jimi and Pascal together?
Jimi gave Paco a lot of war toys, which I mean, all little boys want that stuff, right? It's kind of fun, and so Paco had, and I think maybe because Jimi also wanted to play with them. So you know, Pascal had like really cool tanks that looked like they were real tanks, and all these other things. But we went to watch the movie Gladiator, and then afterwards, and this is kind of because, and we're probably still this immature because it would be fun, but we made our own helmets, and they had like some pretty wacky helmets in that movie, so we got the tinfoil out and made helmets and weapons and had a gladiator battle. Of course, Paco won, and he slaughtered us. So that was, yeah, it was just silliness, but it was silliness in a good way.